Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So as you can see, today we are joined by the sensational Miss Noreen.
Hey honey, what up in this virtual world?
So just to give a bit of background to anyone who is watching, I actually met Noreen officially for the first time at a church event.
It was our first proper encounter, but before that I was still sliding in the DMs, still liking all of your pictures on Instagram. That was just a formality, actually meeting you in person.
But honestly, I think that initial, interaction on social media got me doing my own little stalking, opened me up to all of this amazing work that you were doing, training towards being a fully qualified clinical psychologist. And then I discovered that you're 1/3 of the Breaking Mad team and the work that you're doing around that. And that led me to actually coming to your first ever event, which was insane.
I'm so honored to be here, Wadzi. Like, it feels so nice. Like when you sent me the message asking if we could like collab and do something together, I was just like, oh wow, this is really nice, because I honestly think there's something about coming together and just talking about things that perhaps are a little bit of a sticking point for us as a community, and to even have a chance to just have like a conversation is an amazing thing. So thank you so much for thinking about me. I feel like I'm part of What's World family, you know. I'm in, tapinda. Just to add on to what Wadzi was saying. So my name is Noreen and I am a trainee clinical psychologist. I'm in my second year of 3 years. And to be honest, there isn't kind of many people from Black and minority ethnic groups, especially Black people. But yeah, so I was talking to Wadzi earlier about kind of my journey into psychology. And to be honest, it was quite an interesting one, because I remember when I first told like my parents, Zimbabwean parents, the only 3 professions you can do are, let's name them, was accounting, medicine, and engineering. That's it. Yeah. So imagine me now, my little me. I think I was 14 when I first told them I wanted to do psychology. I feel like my mom. Oh, what is? I think the first question was, you want to go and read people's minds, and I think there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of mystery when it comes to psychology, because people don't actually really know. There's like a fear of the unknown. I told my parents I'm doing psychology. I gave them my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. I told them what university I'm going to get into. And I even told them I was going to do my doctorate, which I think at the time, that dream scared me as a 14-year-old, because I was thinking, I don't know what I'm saying. It just feels like a great dream to have, but I don't know if I'll ever achieve it. And it's so nice now to look back at my 14-year-old. I was like, sis, you did it. You did it. So I guess this serves as like motivation or inspiration to anyone that like you can actually get a job within the field of psychology. And we need more of us, because it's one of those kind of professions that isn't pursued as much as the need. And also, I was saying earlier, because of the passion that I have for the field, I've actually gone further to set up Breaking Mad, which was mentioned earlier, just as a way to like create safe spaces for the Black community to be able to start unpacking mental health, within our own community. There's such a disquiet, such an uncomfortability when it comes to mental health. And I think that's because people don't really know. It's all about that kind of knowledge gap. And what Breaking Mad aims to do is to like bridge that knowledge gap and offer people culturally sensitive information that's tailored to them, written by us, people who look like them. It starts with a conversation. So yeah, thanks for bringing me on, and let's see whether I've been reading my books.
This is a test. No, but honestly, I think for me, coming to your event was such a huge turning point for me, especially because it opened me up to so many things that I guess I personally was struggling with. And I was like, okay, so there are other people that look like me that are also experiencing these things. But because, like you said, we don't have these conversations. So I was never exposed to a safe space to be able to express how I felt or to feel the way that I feel. And it's actually, to be honest, it was coming to your event that triggered this video in itself. Just to like give a bit of background into why this video. So I was on holiday this time last year when we were allowed to travel. I went to France for a long weekend, and it was such a minor situation that happened. So we were waiting for a train, me and an old friend were waiting for a train. And I get really bad panic attacks, like in uncomfortable situations where if I need to confront something, if I need to tackle something head on, or if I'm in an uncertain situation, I get really bad panic attacks. And she mentioned it to me. She was like, you know what, you should, consider well-being classes or, some kind of counseling or any kind of like headspace kind of activity. And she said that and I kind of just brushed it off. And then I actually came to your event and it must have been Christabel actually. She said something around anxiety and she was like, you know what, anxiety often has very negative connotations because you get it in, I'm paraphrasing and you feel free to jump in and correct me, but she was like, it actually can indicate something that's quite good. More often than not, we associate it with the negative. So I actually started seeing someone and I went for like well-being counseling sessions with someone trying to unpack the thoughts that I was having.
It's so nice to hear that, honestly, was it? Because that was the aim of the event. We wanted, if one person, basically you've given us the feedback that we needed to hear back then, that if at least one person left feeling like, oh my goodness, I've made a connection here and I need to do something about it, then we've done our job. And that's essentially, it's so nice for you to share that with me because I didn't know your process and what happened post the event. And I wonder how many more people who came to that event probably had a similar experience. So it's so nice to hear it. I'm glad you're on that journey of just discovering yourself and thinking more about your experiences. So it's so nice to hear. I'm just like, this is just gold dust.
So do you mind just shedding a bit more light on what anxiety is, especially for people that potentially have just a strictly negative association with the word, which I personally believe has, there's two sides to the coin. But do you mind just giving us a bit more insight into what anxiety is at face value?
I think to start off, I think it's really important that you've really reflected on anxiety and what it means to you and how maybe in society, the way we've associated the word with maybe the more negative connotations. So when people think about anxiety, immediately it's something to be gotten rid of, it's dangerous, we should not experience it. If you experience it, there's something faulty or wrong with you. And sometimes I always wonder where that's come from. And I think there's something to do with our relationship in general with emotions, that when we experience emotions, we maybe have a negative relationship with that. But actually, emotions are there for a reason. They are a way of our body communicating with us, if that makes sense. So when you start to think about it that way, anxiety is a communication tool. So it's the way of your body communicating something to you. And it could be a negative thing, it could also be a positive thing. But all in all, there's a function and a purpose for it. So when I talk about anxiety, because I really like to strip it back in a way that is relatable and understandable, because sometimes it becomes so medicalized and there's a lot of jargon thrown around it. But the best way to think about anxiety is that it's a very normal physiological response. So what I mean by that is it's something that originates from our bodily state to start with. And what tends to happen, anxiety is almost like a response that is triggered when our body experiences something that it perceives as an actual threat or a perceived threat. So basically, we could have an experience whereby you're walking down the street, okay? And there's a car coming your way. You need to act fast because that keeps you safe. So that's the same with anxiety. When we experience actual threats in our environment, adrenaline is released into our body and that gets everything firing up. Loads of oxygen is made available. We might get a heart rate increase. We might get a little bit sweaty. All of these functions are important to keep you safe from this source of danger. But sometimes what happens is that we might perceive something as a danger when actually it isn't. So I'll give you an example of a toaster in the house. I don't know. Have you ever had times where your smoke alarm goes off in the house?
Yeah.
The alarm sets off and you might run down thinking, oh my goodness, what's happening? Is the house on fire? But actually be like, for goodness sake, it's just some toast. Now, what's happening there, just to liken it to anxiety, is that sometimes our body responds to situations which perhaps might not be threatening as if it's an actual threat, because our body doesn't always know how to distinguish between what's an actual threat, so like a fire, and what might be just toast. So what happens is that for some of us, we might have more of a sensitive alarm. So way back when our ancestors still lived in times where they had actual dangers in their environment, for example, saber-toothed tigers or lions, we needed to always be ready to fight or flight a situation, because that's how we survive. That's why we're here in 2020. Obviously, Corona is coming to add more of our anxieties. But actually, the essential truth is that back then, we had two responses in the face of danger. You fight or you fly. That's how you manage that situation. But now, fast track to 2020, we're not experiencing the same levels of dangers or threats in our environment as our ancestors did. But the body hasn't quite updated itself. It's almost like we're having an evolutionary hangover. So what that means is that we now have, in 2020, our threats are no longer saber-toothed tigers or lions. Our threats are things like financial problems, relationship breakdown, facing racism or discrimination. That can trigger off our anxiety system. So what I'm saying is that the stresses we face now are more modern. They're not as the ones our ancestors faced, but our body still responds as though we're experiencing actual threats. And actually, the reason why anxiety happens is that it helps to prompt action. So that's why we know it's a good thing. And actually, the reason all of that's happening is that firstly, the body's thinking, oh, there's something really important that I need to pay attention to. But when things go wrong is what we're going to talk about, because as a mechanism, it's important for our survival. But obviously, things can go wrong when actually that kind of response is triggered all the time, and it can get really exhausting. And that's what we really need to kind of think about. When does anxiety start to become a problem, and what do we need to look out for?
When it does become an issue, what are the signs, what are the symptoms that someone can look out for within themselves? So whether it's physiological or psychological, what are the things and the signs that someone can look out for if they are experiencing anxiety as part of a wider mental health issue?
So I think the main thing that we need to think about is making a distinction between anxiety and an anxiety disorder. You often hear people saying, oh my gosh, my anxiety had me moving mad. And it's like, we're talking about anxiety as a general emotion like happiness or sadness. Anxiety is one of them. It's on the spectrum of emotions that we experience. So in everyday speech, it becomes a way of communicating to others how we felt about a certain situation, right? But actually, anxiety can develop into an anxiety disorder. I sometimes find a bit of discomfort in using the word disorder because it has so many strong connotations to it. So I like to think about it as an anxiety difficulty, because normally anxiety is functional, it serves a purpose, it alerts us to things that we need to get done, it motivates us, so there's a reason for it. But anxiety becomes an unwelcome guest when it shows up all the time, even when we don't need it to. So for example, for some people, the anxiety can become more persistent. So we were talking about, for example, an interview. It would make sense why somebody is anxious about an interview. It's a specific situation. And what tends to happen is that after the interview is passed, words will be like, Nyari, I did my interview. It's finished. I'm done. You know, so you're like there waiting for your outcome. So that anxiety response was specific to that situation. When the interview happened, it passes and you're back to your normal day-to-day life, right? So anxiety in that regard is specific to a particular event. But when it becomes an anxiety difficulty is when the anxiety is triggered off in multiple situations. So it could be when you have to go to work, when you get on public transport. Suddenly, the anxiety takes over you and it stops you from actually doing your day-to-day activities. And the main thing is that when you go to, say, a GP and they ask you about your anxiety, they will always ask this question of how long has it been going on for? Experiencing uncomfortable physical sensations in your body. So you might notice heart rates, tummy cramps. You might feel restless. You might experience tension in the body. So what we know is that when we get anxious, it can really drain our system and we can get really, really either tired and fatigued and really exhausted, or we develop a lot of tension in the body. Because if you think about it, if you're in that state fight or fight or flight state, you're going to be tense in your body because you're trying to deal with a difficult situation. So the main things to look out for when things start getting bad is the duration. How long has it been going on for? 2, is it, when you experience physical symptoms, do they feel so unbearable that you don't feel able to manage them using your coping strategies? So some people might try breathing strategies, or they might try and do something to help them manage anxiety, and that doesn't seem to work. Does the anxiety show up at times where you probably don't want it to be? For example, you're just having dinner with your girlfriend, and actually that you start to feel anxious for no known reason. 4, is it getting in the way of doing your day-to-day activities? This is where we really need to think about. So does it stop you from going out for some people? So in my work, I would have people saying to me, I've stopped going on the tube, or they avoid going out for outings. So if a friend asks them to go out for dinner, they don't want to do it. They just avoid any situations that they've associated with the anxiety. So oftentimes you hear people say, I had my first panic attack on the central line. It's busy, it's crowded. Somebody has their first panic attack. Then what happens is that it creates an association between the event and the situation. So the best way to keep themselves safe then is, I'm never going to go back on the central line. So you avoid it, but the more you avoid it, the more fearful you become of the tube. And then you stop going on to public transport. So when your friend calls you to go out for dinner, you're going to be like, no, sorry, does it involve going on the tube? I'm not going to go there. So essentially what happens is that it feeds into a cycle of fear. So you fear the fear of getting anxiety. Does that make sense?
So when I was in my sessions and I was unpacking them, the first thing that's often asked is, tell me about your upbringing, your childhood, trying to establish certain patterns. It was interesting for me because there's something that had happened to me, I don't know how many years ago, but because of that situation, I'd created, like you said, an association with that situation, I guess, to use the same word twice. So whenever anything similar happens, my initial instinct is, okay, you know what, fight or flight, like you said, and it triggers panic in my body because subconsciously I'm still associating something that's happened today with something that happened X number of years ago.
And some of the experiences that we have are kind of printed into our memory. And actually, it makes sense because if you did actually experience a dangerous situation, or say you were somebody who we see people who often have come back from the war, or they've been in a situation where they nearly died. It makes sense why your body is going to try and make sure you don't ever encounter that again, because it's for survival reasons. The best equation I always give to people about anxiety is basically overestimation of something going wrong and underestimation of your ability to cope. So basically what happens is that when a situation happens, you overestimate how bad it's going to be and you catastrophize. That's what we would say. You think about the worst possible thing happening and you underestimate your ability to actually cope with that situation. But think about this. If you keep avoiding that social situation, or you keep avoiding that tube, you are never going to learn that you can actually cope. It's easier said than done, I must say.
It's funny you say that because one of the lives that I tuned into last week, their guest actually said exactly what you said. She said, you have to reach that point where you realize that the worst case scenario is just as likely as the best case scenario. So a lot of the times we focus on, like you said, the worst case scenario, we underestimate our ability to do something and to cope with something. And actually, it's just as likely that we can succeed in this situation and that we can overcome whatever it is that we're faced with. And just another point actually around the negative thoughts and how when they manifest and sort of overthinking, is there a link between, I guess, overthinking and anxiety when it does become a difficulty?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you bring up thought processes, because I think sometimes when we talk about anxiety, we risk just kind of containing the conversation to the physiology. For one person, they might experience this anxiety and be like, oh, I'm fine. I've gone through this before. Like, it's going to pass. It's going to be okay. But for the other person, what actually makes that anxiety experience intense and difficult and distressing is the way they interpret the anxiety. They might fear the worst when actually there isn't any particular danger. So actually the way anxiety works is that our thoughts really do fuel the worries.
It really does, because I think for a lot of people, it's easier to pinpoint the physiological symptoms and the physiological signs, but because your thoughts, you sometimes you don't know if your thoughts are good or bad, if that makes sense. When you overthink, you don't realize you're doing it unless you're in or until you're in conversation with someone and they notice it and they point it out. I think for me personally, it's tackling what you're thinking as one of the symptoms that's probably the harder things to point out and to manage.
And the goal is not to get rid of anxiety, because remember what I said, guys, you need anxiety. It's important. We don't need to get rid of it, because every time I hear people say to me, I'm like, what are your goals for therapy? I want to get rid of anxiety. I'm like, sis, sorry, I can't do that. You need it. I was like, that will be unethical. It will be unethical for me to take away a very important function. Yes. Okay, you've told me what it is. What do I do now?
Okay, so that brings us very nicely into the last part of the video, which is giving people tools, giving them sort of insight or, I guess, advice into how they can manage anxiety when it does become a difficulty.
So the first thing I would say, that it's important that you understand your anxiety, because anxiety will look different for everybody. Everyone's anxiety will look quite different. So there might be certain symptoms that you get that other people don't get. So it's always good to think about what situations tend to trigger your anxiety. Think about what sort of thoughts come up when you're in those situations. What are the common feelings that you get in your body, and what things do you do? So situations, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And it might be helpful for you if you are in that part of your journey where you're not really sure of your anxiety patterns. It might be helpful just for 1 week to keep what we call a thought diary. Anxiety is not just a good thing or a bad thing. It's not that binary is quite false. It's important to just accept that anxiety is a normal, being the word, it's a normal physiological response. And when we change our relationship with anxiety, what you find is that when you experience it, you're not trying to do everything possible to fight it away or change the situation. You just start to learn to sit with it and live with it. And what we know with anxiety, the beauty of anxiety is that it doesn't last forever. So some of the things that you can do to help you when you're feeling anxious, one is to monitor your breathing and just be mindful of it, because what we know is that when people start feeling anxious, I don't know if you relate with this one, but sometimes breathing can be a little bit, it's yeah. What's it like for you?
My breath is quite short. It's almost like I'm breathing from here and not from my lungs.
And what I mean by controlling our breathing is to kind of use techniques. So there's like the 7-4 technique. So basically you breathe in for 4, out for 7. And when you are breathing in and out, it's really important that the only thing that moves is your diaphragm, not your shoulders, not all your body when you're breathing in. So we can try it out now if you want, just to see how it works. So just place your right hand on your tummy and the left hand on your chest. It might be nice also when you're doing your breathing exercise to kind of think about a safe image or something that you associate with peacefulness. For me, it's Barbados, because that was my favorite ever holiday. In through your nose. And then 7 out through your mouth. Exactly. Just helps you to, it helps even to put things into perspective. Understand sometimes you can't always do that if you're in a team meeting, but you might even do things like square breathing. Just find a square in the room and you trace the edges of the square. So going up, you breathe in, and then when you go to the top of the laptop, you breathe out, and then going down, you breathe in, and then going across, you breathe out. And I think the other thing that I would say around managing anxiety is to talk about it. And I know that sounds really, really difficult, and maybe for some people, this is maybe where it gets a bit sticky because you don't know if people are going to understand. But when we start naming how we feel and we give words to it, it loses power over us. And of course, for some people, they need more help than me just talking about day-to-day strategies. You might need more support, for example, going to therapy or working with a registered psychologist to really give you space to explore. Like you were saying, there could be like early life experiences that have influenced your anxiety today. You might need more time to really unpack that in a safe way, in a supported way. So just know when it is that you need to get help. If it's starting to really get in the way of your day-to-day life and you've tried all the strategies, you might need to pick up the call, talk to your GP. Each borough or town, city in the UK has a service called Increasing Access to Psychological Therapies, and that's basically free therapy available on the NHS for everyone.
Thank you for that, honestly. And as you were speaking, it brought me back to, I don't know if you've seen in Zim, there's these old women that started the friendship bench. They have Twitter.
They have Twitter and they post all the initiatives and like all the great work that they're doing. Even during COVID, they're staying active. And I'm just like, this is what I get so excited knowing that these initiatives are happening back home.
That's the first thing that came to mind when you said just having a conversation, because that is essentially what they do. They literally sit on a bench and have conversations, and those conversations start that journey that, you know, each person takes to managing whatever difficulty they're facing.
And I think also we underestimate how difficult it is to start a conversation, and sometimes people then struggle to find the words to kind of share. But like I said before, if it feels too difficult to even say in words, write it down. Find a means to express how it feels on the inside, just to then have something to kind of help initiate a conversation. And it doesn't have to be, you don't need to kind of have all the answers. It could be just an observation. So last week, I went out to the shop and this man he went past me and I just started to feel really anxious. My heart rate kept going up. You don't need to have a clear, succinct, coherent narrative. It's just a description of what happened, with whom, where were you, how did you feel? And that alone can open up a whole channel of conversation about where do we go next. So don't put that pressure on yourself to know and to have all the answers, because actually that's what people like myself are trained to do, to then help you navigate and put the pieces of the puzzle together, and to help you have like a wider perspective of why you might be getting anxiety, what you can do about it, and to empower you to feel able to manage it on a day-to-day basis. It's a human experience, it's normal. We wouldn't pathologize sadness. If someone's sad, they're sad. If somebody's happy, excited, embarrassed, anxiety just adds to that spectrum of emotions that we experience. Just normalizing how you feel and just be an observer to your experience. Just be like, okay, I'm experiencing anxiety now. That's enough. Just to notice what's happening within you. So little by little, we'll get there, I think, in terms of making it more of everyday conversation, because at the moment it's still kind of stigmatized, isn't it?
This is really like, I'm not gonna lie, it's really like uplifted me, and I'm glad that we had this conversation, honestly. And the thing is, I know we could go on for hours and hours, but also I know that on your page, on the Breaking Mad page, you have a lot more information and you dig a bit deeper in specific topics.
We're on Twitter and on Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn, you know, trying to stay professional. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. Like Wadzi said, we kind of unpack different topics a little bit more, and where possible, we try and connect it back to the Black experience, whatever that means, but it's our perspective on issues that we've observed in therapy or things that we've noticed are not spoken about. So it'd be good for people to check out our page.
Thank you so much. Honestly, there were so many gems in that, so much insight, and I love these conversations because I learn as we speak as well. You know, I have like guidance, but I'm like, okay, I'm here to learn. As much as the people who are watching this are learning, so am I. So thank you so much.
No, you're ever so welcome. It's such a pleasure. And hopefully we can, you know, if you want to do another one or talk about other topics, you know, get at your girl.
Of course,
I'm
this
here
is the
for
first time,
yes,
but not the last
not the last time.